I'm Dr. Ali Matu. What's the psychology behind Star Trek and Star Wars? Let's find out on the Psych Show. This week, I'm returning to San Diego Comic-Con for episode 5 of the Psychology of Star Trek vs. Star Wars panel series. The idea for this panel series started a few years ago when my friend and fellow geeky psychologist Dr. Andrea Letamendi and I were talking about how these stories had shaped our lives. Star Wars taught her how to achieve her full potential, and Star Trek gave me hope that we could push the human race forward. Both stories were key in our journey to become psychologists. I guess you could say these stories were our lithium crystals and hyperdrive motivators. We thought it would be a lot of fun to continue that conversation at Comic-Con. And that's what the Psychology of Star Trek vs. Star Wars is all about. Celebrating these awesome stories, exploring psychological science, and digging a knife into each other's fandom. Perhaps today is a good day to die. Oh, yes, give in to your anger. Alright guys, shake it off, shake it off. Before our 5th panel premieres later this week, let's take a look back at my top 5 moments from the Psychology of Star Trek vs. Star Wars panel series. Special thanks to Bryan Ward. Not only has he served as our impartial moderator, but he's also provided much of the footage you're about to enjoy. Number 5, artificial stupidity. In our first panel, Bryan asked us a question about artificial intelligence, and our special guests, Hugh, Sterbakov, and Larry Nemecek, really get into it with each other, which is awesome because I had no idea how to counter Andrea's criticism of Star Trek.
In wars, how do you guys like to deal with your artificial?
For us, it's artificial stupidity. If R2-D2 had said like 3 things, nothing in Star Wars happened.
There is this intersection of fields with robotics and psychology that deals with something called the uncanny valley. And the closer they start to represent a human form, the more revulsion and disgust we as humans actually feel. If we think about R2-D2 being clearly robotic, not trying to emulate a human form, and you have maybe C-3PO who uses words but still clearly is distinguished as a robot, I feel like Star Wars understands that humans and androids or robots need to work together where there's that clear distinction. Whereas you have someone like Data, who you would think would instill this disgust and revulsion and this sort of negative response because he's just a little too close to being human. But you've got your universe sort of interacting with him and loving him as if it's not weird.
But the arc of Data itself, there were plenty of people who didn't like Data, who distrusted Data. The guy that wanted to disassemble
Picture
him.
of a man.
Yeah. And they didn't like Soong. They didn't like Soong's work, and he was an outcast. The Star Trek, over its own eras of 200-300 years, much less the eras of 40 years of production, has treated, there's a spectrum of how they treat artificial intelligence.
Number 4, worst teammate ever. My number 4 moment comes from episode 4 of the panel, featuring Sam Witwer and Roddenberry. We were talking about Darth Maul and Khan, and I started talking about revenge, and that's when someone on the panel was betrayed by their teammate.
You could have been genetically bred to conquer the Earth and be the best of the tyrants, but sometimes you only got a quarter of the Earth under your possession before they jettisoned you into space, and you're pissed about that. And you could have been given away to a Lord of the Sith to be his apprentice, and just before you got to realize that potentially you were cut in half. Let's talk about these 2 franchises and what it means to, psychologically be put into this position of nearly realizing those goals and then to have it taken away.
Both of these characters become consumed with one thing, and that's revenge. Khan wants it against Kirk, Maul wants it against Obi-Wan, and we see that in Clone Wars. The psychology here comes down to that line, I've done far worse than kill you. I've hurt you, and I want to go on hurting you. at first, revenge feels good. But what the research has shown is the more you're stuck on revenge, as you're ruminating on these thoughts, that pain, that wound, the rumination about how angry you are at Obi-Wan, and how angry you are at Kirk, it just festers.
While I understand Khan's feelings of revenge, it biologically or neurobiologically is a bit superficial. So you hear that phrase, trauma causes brain damage, or the body never forgets, or the body keeps score. That's what we're seeing in the psychological result when we finally encounter Darth Maul in that junk planet on Lotho Minor, and he's just completely psychologically disoriented, dysfunctional. That speaks to the neurobiology of that experience of failure and trauma and stress. And it's hard to watch, but I thought that was very realistic.
I'm just going to say this. I'm the worst teammate ever because I'm going to reveal something here that is going to give Star Trek fans a lot of glee. So I'm sorry. Because what you said was beautiful and what you said was where I'm going to go with this.
This is great. I really don't have to do anything.
So when me and Dave Filoni were talking about Darth Maul, we talked about the whole arc all the way through before we actually recorded anything. And one of the things that we kept touching back on is, I've done far worse than kill you, I've hurt you. So thank you, Star Trek, thank you, Drea, thank you everyone for
feeding that response. I suck at this.
Number 3, it's just a TV show. Star Trek and Star Wars aren't just stories about the dark side, they're also stories about friendship, people working together, and sometimes falling in love. We explored those themes in episode 3 of our panel featuring Chase Masterson and Catherine Tabor. Pay no attention to me fanboying out for being on a panel with Chase Masterson.
We're attracted to people we're similar to. We're attracted to people we see often. We're attracted to people that are familiar to us. So I think one of the reasons why Lita and Rom were attracted to each other is because they worked together. They saw each other a lot. It's not only about being near someone and seeing that person frequently, but it's about something that you care about that's important to you, and you see that in the other person as well. And I think the turning point for Lita and Rom was that episode where didn't actually happen. I promised myself I wasn't going to do that, and I did. It's when your character and Rom form that union against Quark. And I think you see your character saw Rom in a different light there, where there's a shared value of caring about the people around you.
Only way to throw a wall between chairs.
I'm trying really hard. It's
just a TV show. We take it very seriously.
Oh my God.
After hour.
Number 2, some lovely white armor. Another spirited debate came up in episode 2 of our panel featuring Bryan Young and John Champion. We were talking about the United Federation of Planets, the Galactic Empire, and the psychology behind these governments. It was the first time I realized why Star Trek and Star Wars work so well together.
There are some important reasons why the Empire might be more realistic. So if you're sitting here thinking like, how would they be able to execute Order 66? How are these people able to blow up entire planets? Like, what is the psychology behind that? Because there are a lot of people on the bad side, and they're all organized, and they're all sort of willing to do this. Has anyone heard of the Stanford prison experiment? Can I just kind of see? So I don't have to go through all that, but you know that there's this idea in psychology of de-individuation, where if you have things like masks and helmets and things that sort of influence the ability of people to recognize you, anonymity, that you will be more likely to engage in transgressions. You will be more likely to, exhibit abnormal behavior and sometimes aggressive behavior.
Both series are actually really good at showing us something that we need to learn. I think The Empire illustrates something that's much darker but much more realistic. The Empire maneuvers with moneyed interests. It maneuvers with lobbying efforts. It maneuvers with all of these horrible things that we're watching play out on the news day after day, regardless of who's in power
There's something about the Empire that is obviously terrifying, and it appeals to this sort of authoritarian streak. So I guess if you totally devalue your individuality and really have a hankering for that kind of oppression, then sign up for the Empire today. They have some lovely white armor that will look good on you. It's the complete opposite with the Federation. There is a hierarchy, there is a structure in place, but there is a kind of inclusion and a self-determination there that is just completely anathema to the other side.
So going on to Star Trek, one of the big psychological ideas are superordinate goals. There's this classic study in psychology. It's the kind of stuff we can't do anymore because now we have institutional review boards that say that stuff is unethical. But there's a psychologist who got a group of kids and made them hate each other. So this group hated this group. And they just hated each other. There was violence and aggression and all of that. And then, on one of the later days at the summer camp, he made them work together on a goal that they couldn't achieve separately. They had to collaborate. When they were forced to work on this superordinate goal, those problems, the prejudice, the violence, the conflict, it disappeared. That's the United Federation of Planets. It's focusing on these big goals that we need a lot of people to contribute to work together to achieve.
And the number one moment? Sitting next to the guy's kid. My all-time favorite moment comes from episode 4 when Bryan asked us a question about what these stories say about their creators. Not only did we get to hear from Gene Roddenberry's son, Rod Roddenberry, but Sam Witwer gave us an awesome impression of George Lucas.
And I know that my father had an incredible life. You know, he was a World War II pilot. He was a LAPD officer. He wrote speeches for the chief of police when they were trying to, you know, bring the police LAPD and the community closer together. He was thinking about those things then. I mean, he saw the worst that humanity had to offer, and he saw the best that humanity had to offer. And it was with that perspective that he had that he was able to sort of build these philosophies. And he infused them into the show. I really love what the series teaches us. And I think it teaches us all something a little different, but it does teach us that we need to not tolerate each other, but we need to truly accept each other and find beauty in the differences between us. And that's how we grow as a species, by hearing things that are contrary to our thoughts and being willing to accept them.
And the story of Gene Roddenberry is a story of resilience. This is an individual who did go through and saw a lot of horrific things, whether it's World War II or working as a police officer. And he was able to survive those things, to endure them, and to grow as a person. And I think that experience must have in some way influenced the story of Star Trek, which is a story about resilience and working to better ourselves.
I completely agree. I think that...
What is wrong with this man?
Well, no, hold on for a second. You're asking us to get competitive when we're sitting next to the guy's kid? Come on, man.
That's the best kind!
George Lucas had this almost idea to create these worlds out of escapism, out of this need for us to kind of get outside of where we are and who we are even, in order to kind of be in this fantasy world and get excited and get hopeful and you know, kind of get lost in it. It wasn't meant to be, a premonition or prediction of where we're going to be. I think it's a way for us to kind of get outside of where we are in order to kind of cope with what's going on.
It seems to me that your father, when he wanted to make Star Trek, he had some things to say, and he wanted to slip it into these sugar pills and you know, get the audience to digest it without knowing what they were consuming. You know, it seems to me that was a real ambition. George Lucas, I don't think when he started quite had that ambition. I think that all artists feel the need to create something. We don't exactly know why, we just do. And then the deeper the artist is, the more that interesting things slip into that creation. Star Wars, Darth Vader was supposed to die at the end. You guys know that? The main character of the entire series, that they did a whole TV series on, was supposed to die at the end of Star Wars. And George Lucas had some weird instinct to like, you know what? Can we just do a thing where he spins off into the distance? Because if you can't, you're fired. The point is that George Lucas's the things he was putting into those movies, I think, were incidental to what he was doing. I think it was because George has things that he thinks about. George has things that are important to him, and if you're going to make a fun popcorn movie, those things are going to slip in. Roddenberry, I think, was a little bit more considered, which is, I think, exactly why these two franchises, you know, they both engage both sides of the brain, right? Both of them. Hugely creative, hugely intellectual. Both of them have that. I think Star Trek is a little bit more left brain. Star Wars is a little bit more right brain. And
there's also hundreds of hours of Star Trek.
Right.
By comparison.
Just give Disney a few years and
What questions do you have about the psychology of Star Trek versus Star Wars? Let me know in the comments below, and we might just feature your question on a future panel. For more awesome psychology from Dr. Andrea Letamendi and Bryan Ward, check out the Arkham Sessions, a weekly podcast dedicated to the psychological analysis of Batman, the animated series. Click on these videos to watch our panels in their entirety. Click on my phaser or my lightsaber to subscribe and get more Psych Show.